Lower tax rate does not mean lower taxes. The truth Texas taxpayers deserve. Most taxpayers hear the same message every year. We lowered the tax rate. And most people reasonably believe that means their taxes went down. But under Texas law, that statement can be technically true and still be deeply misleading. So, how does Texas legally define a tax increase? How can local governments raise taxes even when the rate goes down? Let's dig into the Rusk County's tax rates for 2017 to 2025. How does Texas law define a tax increase? In Texas, whether taxes went up is not determined by comparing this year's tax rate to last year's tax rate. Texas compares the adopted rate to the no new revenue rate. The no new revenue rate is the tax rate that would generate the same amount of revenue from the same properties as the previous year. Here is the key point every taxpayer needs to know. If a county adopts a tax rate above the no new revenue rate, Texas law defines that action as a tax increase. And that is true even if the rate itself goes down. It is true even if some individual tax bills go down. And it is true even if officials say, we lowered the tax rate. This language is mandated by statute in order to bring truth in taxation and transparency to the taxpayer. So, why is this so confusing for taxpayers? Taxpayers understandably think, my rate went down, so my taxes didn't increase, but Texas law asks a different question. Did the county choose a tax rate that brings in more money from existing properties than the year before? If the answer is yes, Texas law says taxes went up. Truth in taxation requires official public notices state this tax rate will result in a tax increase, even while officials publicly claim they lowered the tax rate. Both statements can exist at the same time because they measure different things. What is the voter approval rate? The voter approval rate, or VAR, is the highest tax rate a county can adopt without automatically triggering a voter election. Voter approval rate is a calculated rate under state law based on prior year revenue, allowed growth, and debt service, not simply a flat percentage cap. Voters, years ago, government entities could raise the tax rate as high as 8% without voter approval. Now, the maximum a government entity can raise the rate is 3.5% under normal circumstances. Previously, taxpayers had to gather petition signatures to force a rollback election to lower the rate. Now, if a county proposes a rate above the voter approval rate, an automatic election must be held so voters can approve or reject the increase. This creates a clear decision point for counties. They can adopt the no new revenue rate, or they can adopt the highest rate allowed without asking voters, and that choice matters. So, what has actually happened in Rusk County since 2017? You may hear officials say the tax rate in Rusk County dropped from 61 cents in 2017 to about 54 cents today. That statement is numerically true, but it doesn't tell the whole story. Here's what the public records show. In 2017, Rusk County adopted a rate above the no new revenue rate. Under Texas law, that was a tax increase. In 2018, the county adopted a rate lower than the no new revenue rate, which was a tax decrease. In 2019, the county adopted the no new revenue rate. This did not constitute a tax increase under Texas law. In 2020, the county adopted a rate lower than the no new revenue rate, which was a tax decrease. In 2021, the county adopted a rate above the no new revenue rate, but lower than the voter approval rate, but it was still a tax increase. Then in 2022, 2023, and 2024, the Commissioner's Court adopted the maximum rate allowed under voter approval rate every single year. Each of those years, taxes increased under Texas law. For 3 consecutive years, the county chose the highest rate legally allowed without triggering a voter election. That is not lowering taxes. That is maximizing collections while avoiding voter approval. The county's own budget also confirms it. For example, the 2025 Rusk County budget on the very first page states the following. This budget will raise more revenue from property taxes than last year's budget by $1,749,818.43, or 7.219%. To comply with truth in taxation laws, disclosure is required by Texas law, and it matters because about $422,000 came from new property added to the tax roll. The rest came from existing taxpayers. That meets the legal definition of a tax increase. You may hear elected officials say, well, property values went up, not us. However, that is not an excuse because Texas law already accounts for rising property values by calculating the no new revenue rate. If property values rise and a county truly wants to avoid raising taxes, it adopts the no new revenue rate. When a county adopts a rate above that level, it is making a deliberate policy choice to collect more money. Rising appraisals do not force tax increases, rate decisions do. Does economic development and tax abatements lower our property taxes? Officials often point to economic development projects and tax abatements as evidence of fiscal responsibility, but tax abatements do not eliminate taxes. They shift the burden by reducing the tax base, unless offset by spending restraint. When large entities receive abatements, someone else makes up the difference, often homeowners and small businesses. What was the county-wide school tax? A special county school equalization tax was created in 1939 to fund the old boom era schools in Rusk County. For decades, Rusk County collected a county-wide school tax and continued collecting after the London-Gaston districts were formally consolidated in 1965. For decades, education has been provided by independent school districts. Citizens repeatedly raised concerns and formally requested that tax be eliminated, yet the Commissioner's Court took no action. Ultimately, it required intervention by the Texas legislature in 2021 to remove this tax burden from local taxpayers. That history matters because it demonstrates that protecting the taxpayer was not a priority at the local level, and that the court lacked the political will to eliminate an unnecessary and burdensome tax without state intervention, overriding local control. Despite influx of federal ARPA funds, taxes increased. There is one more critical fact every taxpayer needs to understand. Rusk County received $10,567,728 in federal ARPA funds. While ARPA funds are legally restricted and not interchangeable with general revenue, it was still an over $10.5 million revenue infusion into Rusk County. ARPA funds were intended to offset revenue losses, support public services, and reduce financial pressure on local governments. Yet, despite receiving more than $10.5 million in federal funds, the county still adopted tax rates above the no new revenue rate and collected more money from existing taxpayers. That combination of federal windfall plus higher local taxes is what makes these increases particularly egregious. It raises a simple question taxpayers deserve answered. If the county had over $10 million in federal relief, why was it still necessary to increase the tax burden on property owners? The 2025 no new revenue rate was the exception, not the rule. In 2025, the Commissioner's Court finally adopted the no new revenue rate after 4 consecutive years of adopting a tax increase, and the last 3 years adopting the highest tax rate legally permitted without triggering a voter election. While this decision is appreciated, reasonable questions remain. Would the no new revenue rate have been adopted absent an election year, particularly when the county judge initially recommended approval of the higher rate? It also invites consideration of whether the presence of 12 taxpayer watchdogs sitting in court influenced the decision, especially given that it followed 4 straight years of increasing taxes. To conclude, what should taxpayers remember? Here's the truth every Texas taxpayer deserves to know. A lower tax rate does not automatically mean lower taxes. Texas law defines tax increases by revenue, not rhetoric. Public notices are governed by statute, and the budget, not the talking point, tells the real story. This isn't about blame, it's about informed citizens, honest explanations, and accountability. Because when taxpayers understand how the system actually works, they can ask better questions and engage more meaningfully with local government. And that's how transparency is supposed to work.